I said it quietly. No dramatics, no trembling voice, no build-up. I just looked my father in the eye across that dinner table, surrounded by every person in my family who had ever looked through me. And I said it like I was commenting on the weather. Actually, I closed on mine 6 months ago. I just didn't tell anyone who spent years telling me I couldn't. The table went silent. My aunt set down her fork. My brother stopped mid-chew. My father, the man who had just spent 4 solid minutes gushing about my brother's new house like he'd personally built it with his own hands, just stared at me. And for the first time in 31 years, I didn't look away first. Let me back up. My name is Wren. I'm the younger one, the quieter one, the one my father has been slightly confused about for as long as I can remember. Not in a cruel way, not exactly. More in the way you're confused by a piece of furniture you didn't pick out yourself. You're not sure where it goes, so you just leave it in the corner and walk past it every day without really seeing it. My brother's name is Colin. He's 4 years older than me, 6'1", went to state on a partial athletic scholarship, and has had my father's complete and total devotion since approximately the day he was born. I don't say that to be bitter. I say it because it's the most plainly observable fact of my childhood. The same way it's a fact that we had a blue house and a golden retriever named Scout, and a crack in the kitchen ceiling that my father always said he'd fix and never did. Colin was the story my parents told at every gathering. His grades, his games, his promotions, his girlfriend, then his fiancé, then his wife, then their house in the suburbs with a 2-car garage. Every holiday, every cookout, every birthday dinner. Colin was the headline. I was the footnote. Sometimes I wasn't even that. I used to tell myself it didn't bother me. I was good at telling myself things. Growing up, I was the kid who did her homework without being asked and got decent grades without anyone throwing a party about it. I ran cross-country in high school. I worked at the coffee shop on Route 9 from junior year through my first 2 years of college. I paid for my own textbooks. Nobody really noticed any of it, or if they did, they mentioned it the way you mentioned that the dishwasher ran. Fine, expected. Nothing to celebrate. Meanwhile, Colin got a B- in calculus, and my father took him out for a steak dinner to talk about resilience. I'm not exaggerating. I was there. I remember sitting at that same restaurant watching my father put his hand on Colin's shoulder and say, "The mark of a man isn't his grades, son. It's how he gets back up." And I thought about the A I'd gotten in AP chemistry that nobody had mentioned. I cut a piece of my steak and ate it and said nothing. That was my role. The one who said nothing. After college, I moved to Charlotte. My parents and Colin stayed in Virginia, close enough that holiday travel was always expected, far enough that I could breathe between visits. I got a job at a mid-sized tech company, doing UX research, which my father described to his friends as something with computers. I got a second job on nights and weekends doing freelance research consulting. I lived small. I saved aggressively. I had a plan, and the plan was mine, and I didn't tell anyone about it. Part of that was just practicality. My family had never been particularly interested in my plans, but part of it, and I'll be honest about this, was something else. Something quieter. A decision I had made so gradually I didn't even realize I'd made it until it was already done. I had stopped needing them to believe in me. I wasn't going to perform my progress for people who weren't really watching. I wasn't going to announce things so they could react with mild surprise and then pivot the conversation back to Colin within 4 minutes. I was just going to do what I was doing and let it be real without their acknowledgement. I know how that sounds. I know people say things like, "I'm doing it for myself, not for them." And it's sometimes just a way of protecting yourself from rejection in advance. Maybe that was part of it too, but I'd been at enough holiday tables to know that the alternative, sharing something, hoping for warmth, getting lukewarm, was worse than saying nothing. So I said nothing. For years, the first Christmas after I made the decision to buy, I sat at my mother's table and listened to Colin talk about the equity he was building in his house for 45 minutes, while my father nodded like Colin had personally invented the concept of home ownership. I ate 2 helpings of sweet potato casserole and nodded at appropriate intervals and felt absolutely nothing, which was its own kind of progress. The thing about being invisible for long enough is that you stop flinching. You stop waiting for the moment they finally see you. It's almost peaceful, in a hollow sort of way. I looked at close to 40 houses over 8 months. I drove to neighborhoods in the early morning before work to watch the light. I brought a legal pad to every showing and wrote notes in the margins. I asked questions my realtor said most first-time buyers never thought to ask. I hired an inspector who had 30 years of experience and paid out of pocket for a second opinion on the foundation of the house I eventually chose. I did everything right, quietly, the way I had learned to do everything. I signed the papers on a Tuesday afternoon in March. The notary congratulated me. My realtor hugged me. I drove home to my apartment, my last night in my apartment, and sat on the floor of my empty living room and cried. Not from sadness, but from some kind of relief I didn't have words for. I didn't call my parents. I texted a few close friends. I bought myself a decent bottle of wine and ordered Thai food and watched a documentary about ocean currents, and it was one of the best nights of my life. I moved in 2 weeks later with the help of 3 friends and a rented truck. I painted the bedroom a warm sage green. I bought a second-hand couch from a woman on Marketplace who told me her kids had grown up on it and it was the most comfortable thing she'd ever owned. She was right. I hung my grandmother's watercolor over the fireplace. I planted rosemary along the front walk because I'd read that it came back every year and I liked the idea of something coming back. I didn't tell my family. Not my mother, not my father, not Colin. My mother called me once a week, usually on Sunday evenings, and I talked to her for 20 minutes about work and the weather and what I was watching on TV. And she talked to me about Colin's kitchen renovation and my father's back, and whatever drama was happening in their neighborhood. She never asked me if I was happy. I'm not sure it occurred to her to ask. I said I was fine and she said good and we both moved on. 5 months passed. Then it was September and my cousin was getting married in Richmond and the whole family was going to be there. Which meant a dinner beforehand. Which meant 4 hours in a room with people who loved Colin loudly and loved me in that vague, generalized way that means they'd be sad if something happened to you but couldn't name 3 facts about your daily life. I went anyway. I always went. Absence creates its own kind of conversation, and I wasn't interested in becoming a topic. The dinner was at my aunt and uncle's house, my mother's sister. Long table in the dining room, the good china, my aunt's famous roast chicken, too many people talking over each other the way my family always did. I found a seat near the end of the table between my cousin Lee and my uncle Dennis, and figured I'd get through the salad course with minimal engagement. It started with the house. It always started with the house. Colin and his wife had recently redone their back deck. Trex decking, my father said. Very durable, very low maintenance, and apparently the whole neighborhood had complimented them on it. My father told the story with the same energy most people reserve for announcements of major medical breakthroughs. My mother added details. Colin smiled in that way he'd perfected, modest on the surface, pleased underneath. I ate my salad. Then my father, glass of wine in hand, leaned back in his chair the way he does when he's about to hold court, and said, "Honestly, that generation knows how to invest. Colin and Dana. They're building something. Equity. Real estate. That's how you do it?" He looked around the table, gathering nods. "Property is the smartest thing you can own at their age." My uncle agreed. My aunt agreed. Lee said, "Totally," and reached for the bread. And then my father looked down the table at me. He had the expression he always got, the one that was almost fond, almost searching, like he was trying to remember something just out of reach. He said, "Wren's still renting, right? Down in Charlotte?" He said it gently. That was the part that used to sting. He never said these things with malice. He was just stating what he understood to be true, in the same tone you'd note that the sky was overcast. "Down in Charlotte renting," he said again, half to himself, like he was reciting a fact from a file. "Well, it's a good city, good opportunities, maybe eventually." He trailed off, shrugged a little. The shrug that meant, someday, maybe, who knows, we'll see. Then he smiled at Colin. "But your brother figured it out. 4 years in, and the place is already appreciated, what, 15%? 18, Colin said. My father pointed at him like he'd won a prize. 18%. That's what smart decisions look like. The table murmured. Someone asked about the square footage. Someone else asked about the school district. I was still sitting there. I watched my father hold court about my brother's investment strategy for another 3 minutes. I watched my mother nod at everything he said. I watched Lee check her phone under the table. I looked down at my plate, at the salad I'd barely touched, and I did what I always did in these moments. I took a slow breath and I let it pass through me. Except this time something shifted. It wasn't anger exactly. I've thought about it a lot since then and I don't think it was anger. It was more like clarity. The kind that comes after you've been patient for so long that the patience itself transforms into something else. Not bitterness, but a kind of clean, quiet certainty. I knew something everyone at that table didn't know. And for the first time, I decided to say it. I set down my fork. I picked up my water glass, took one sip, set it back down. And then I looked at my father and said, calmly, clearly, with a small smile that I hope looked exactly as peaceful as it felt, actually. I closed on my house 6 months ago. I just didn't mention it to anyone who spent years assuming I couldn't. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't perform it. I didn't wait for a reaction before I'd finished the sentence. I just said it and then took a bite of my salad. The table went quiet in that specific way that happens when something lands so differently from what anyone expected that the room needs a second to catch up. I heard my aunt set down her fork. I heard my uncle make a small sound, like the beginning of a word he decided not to finish. I could feel my mother staring at me from 3 seats down. My father said, "What?" "I bought a house," I said. "In Charlotte. 3 bedrooms, nice yard, good bones. I closed on it in March." He stared at me. Why didn't you say anything?" I thought about that for a moment. I thought about every Sunday phone call my mother had spent telling me about Colin's deck. I thought about the steak dinner for the B-. I thought about every holiday table where I'd sat in the corner like furniture that didn't quite fit. "I'm saying something now," I said. "It wasn't a fight. I want to be clear about that. I didn't yell, didn't lay out a list of grievances, didn't cry. I didn't need to. The sentence had already done what it needed to do." My brother said, That's great, Wren. Seriously. And I think he actually meant it. "Colin and I have never been enemies. We've just been moving in different orbits, playing different roles in a story someone else was writing about us." He looked slightly uncomfortable, which made sense. "None of this was really about him," my mother said. "Why didn't you tell us?" Her voice was soft, almost wounded, and I understood that her hurt was real even if I couldn't fix it right then. "I handled it myself," I said. "That's all." My father was quiet. He looked at me with that same searching expression, except now something in it was different. Like a file he'd had in his head for 30 years had just updated and the data didn't match what he'd stored. He looked like a man trying to reconcile 2 things that didn't fit together. He said, "I didn't know you were." "I know," I said. Gently. "That's okay." The dinner continued. My aunt brought out the chicken. Lee asked me questions about the neighborhood, the size, whether I had a garage. My uncle asked about the interest rate I blocked in, and nodded approvingly. The conversation moved, the way family conversations do, into different territory. But something had shifted. I could feel it the way you feel a change in barometric pressure before rain. Not visible, but real. After dessert, I helped clear the table. My mother found me alone in the kitchen for a moment, and she looked at me in a way she hadn't looked at me in a long time, like she was actually seeing me. She said, "I'm proud of you." I said, "Thank you." And I meant it, even though I'd been proud of myself for months without anyone's help. That's the part I want to be careful about, because I know how easy it is to frame stories like this as being about the triumph, the vindication, the moment the room goes quiet and finally sees you. And yes, that moment happened. Yes, it felt like something. But the house had already been real for 6 months before anyone at that table knew about it. It had been real the night I signed the papers and sat on my empty floor. It had been real every morning I woke up in my own space, under a roof that belonged to me. Their knowing didn't create it. Their reaction, however it landed, didn't validate it. I drove home that Sunday through 3 states, windows down, music up. I pulled into my driveway a little after 11. I sat in the car for a minute with the engine off, listening to the neighborhood settle into quiet. I thought about something I read once. That the real test of whether you've outgrown someone's approval is whether you still need it after you succeeded without it. I walked up to my front door, the rosemary brushing against my hand in the dark, and I went inside. I wasn't the afterthought anymore. Maybe I never really was. I just hadn't decided to correct the record until now. I've thought a lot about why I waited so long to say anything, not just at that dinner table, but in general, about my work, my savings, my plans, my life. For a long time I told myself it was privacy, that I was a private person and there was nothing wrong with that. And that was true, partly. But the fuller truth is that I had spent so many years having my small victories met with polite indifference that I'd simply stopped offering them. You learn eventually what the room will do with what you give it. What I didn't expect was what that silence would do for me. When you stop seeking approval from people who weren't really giving it anyway, something strange happens. You stop making decisions for the reaction. You stop buying the house you can afford to talk about and start buying the house that's actually right. You stop timing your moves to moments that will land well at the dinner table. You just move, quietly, carefully, in the direction that makes sense to you. And the work you do in that silence, the spreadsheets you build at 11 at night, the neighborhoods you drive through alone on Saturday mornings, the questions you ask that nobody sees you ask, that work is clean. It belongs entirely to you. Wren's outcome wasn't an accident. It wasn't luck. It was the direct result of years of decisions made without an audience. Every time my father redirected the conversation back to Colin, I went home and put another $400 into savings. Every time someone asked, "Still renting?" in that tone that made it sound like a character flaw, I pulled up my spreadsheet and updated the numbers. I wasn't punishing anyone. I wasn't building toward a moment. I was just doing the work, because the work was the point. That's what I mean when I talk about intelligence. Not raw ability, not test scores, but the discipline to stay focused on what's real when everything around you is telling you to perform instead. Wren was never the loudest person at the table. She was the one who understood, earlier than most people do, that loudness and progress are not the same thing. And the ethics of it, the moral weight of a moment like that dinner, aren't really about the silence breaking. They're about the choices made long before anyone was watching. Did you cut corners? Did you take the easy version of the thing, the one that would look good in conversation but cost you in the long run? Or did you do it right, even when doing it right meant doing it alone? Wren hired the second inspector. She drove out at 6 in the morning to see how the light hit the street. She made the harder call every time because she decided, somewhere along the way, that the quality of her actual life mattered more than the version of it that other people could narrate. That's the thing about resilience that doesn't get said enough. It isn't about surviving hard moments. It's about staying honest about what you're building and for whom, when nobody's checking. My father didn't create Wren's house by ignoring her. She created it herself in the space his indifference accidentally gave her. That's not a tragedy. That's leverage. She walked into that dinner already knowing something no one else at the table knew. And when the moment came, not because she planned it, but because the moment arrived and she was finally ready to let it, she didn't perform. She just told the truth. That's the whole thing, really. She just told the truth. Calmly, without armor, without a speech. And that was enough, because the truth had already been real for 6 months without anyone's help.